Portland French Bakery, makers of authentic old world breads. This corporate producer has made a major contribution to the Oregon Public Broadcasting Program Fund for Excellence and invites you to join them in supporting Oregon Public Broadcasting.
4 children enter an enchanted land through a magic wardrobe and find themselves fulfilling an ancient prophecy.
When 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve sit in those 4 thrones, then it will be the end, not only of the
week, tonight at 9 here on OPB.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by ODS Health Plan, the group medical plan that meets the needs of more than 600,000 Oregonians by providing a broad range of medical and dental coverage and responsive service.
Good evening. I'm Robert MacNeil in New York.
And I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington. After tonight's news summary, we look at the Federal Reserve's dramatic cut in interest rates. Will it help jumpstart the economy? Then Paul Salmon explains why banks can't give away loans. Next, Mario Cuomo says no for 92. Gergen and Shields will have their say about that. And finally, South Africa takes an historic step toward ending white rule. Charlene Hunter-Gault reports from Johannesburg.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the MacNeil Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
The Federal Reserve took dramatic action today to resuscitate the economy. It slashed the key discount rate 1 point to 3.5%. That's a 27-year low and the first full point cut in a decade. The rate is what the Fed charges banks for loans. A short time after the announcement, Morgan Guaranty lowered its prime rate 1 point to 6.5%. Other major banks followed later in the day. The prime is a benchmark for many businesses and consumer loans. Also today, the Commerce Department said the economy grew at only a 1.8% annual rate in the third quarter. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, a group of congressional Democrats unveiled a plan to reverse the nation's trade deficit with Japan. Senator Donald Regal of Michigan talked about the proposal at a news conference.
If we continue to serve as an economic doormat for Japan, we will lose control of our economic future. That will lead to a lower standard of living, a weaker nation here, and social chaos. This predatory trading pattern by Japan is unfair, it's destructive, and it must be stopped before more of America's industrial base is destroyed. Our legislation today will force an end to unfair one-way Japanese trade. It calls for fair and open trade, which will systematically eliminate these deliberate deficits and achieve a balance of trade between the United States and Japan over the next 5 years.
The proposal would force Japan to cut its $41 billion trade surplus with the U.S. by 21% in the next 5 years or face new trade restrictions. Japan's ambassador to the U.S. said today he hoped U.S. exporters would redouble their efforts to penetrate the Japanese market, but he said, "You cannot sell your products and service if you treat your possible customers as if they're your enemies." Judy?
New York Governor Mario Cuomo finally ended the long public waiting game today. He told reporters in Albany, New York, that he will not seek the Democratic presidential nomination. He said that failure to resolve New York's budget crisis prevented him from meeting today's filing deadline for the nation's first primary in New Hampshire. He said he would not hold open the possibility of entering later primaries because Democratic Party Chairman Ron Brown told him it would be detrimental to the party.
In South Africa today, black and white leaders opened talks aimed at transforming the country into a multiracial democracy. The government, the African National Congress, and 17 other groups are discussing how to develop a new constitution. White conservative groups and black leftists boycotted the talks. At the end of the first day, South African President F.W. de Klerk and ANC leader Nelson Mandela traded charges.
An organization which remains committed to an armed struggle cannot be trusted completely when it also commits itself to peacefully negotiated solutions.
If a man can come to a conference of this nature and play the type of politics which are contained in his paper, very few people would like her to deal with such a man.
We'll have a report from Charlene Hunter-Galt in Johannesburg later in the program.
Leaders of the Soviet republics began arriving in Alma-Ata, the capital of Kazakhstan, today. They will meet there this weekend to settle the details of a new Commonwealth agreement. All but one of the 12 republics have indicated they intend to sign the pact tomorrow. On the eve of the meeting, Russian President Boris Yeltsin took further steps to wrest power from the dying Soviet government. Gabi Rado of Independent Television News reports from Moscow.
Though Boris Yeltsin himself was in Italy, the Russian parliament published more of his decrees today. One of them gives Ivan Silayev, the former caretaker prime minister of the Soviet Union, the job of Russia's representative to the EC. Another puts the Foreign Operations Directorate of the once feared KGB intelligence service under Russian control. Both decrees further prove to some that Boris Yeltsin considers his republic to be the natural successor of the USSR. Anatoly Sobchak, mayor of St. Petersburg and a long-time advisor to Boris Yeltsin, is now concerned about the way the Russian president is handling the transition to the new Commonwealth, the next stage of which comes tomorrow at the Inter-Republican Summit in the Kazakh capital, Alma-Ata.
Я, в отличие от команды Ельцина, считаю, что
My difference with Yeltsin's team is that I believe this transformation should be within a strict legal framework. A certain continuity should be ensured, and we should determine very clearly what structures should be kept as inter-republican ones.
What is your opinion of Mr. Yeltsin's decrees yesterday?
I am very much afraid that they will torpedo the talks to be held at Alma-Ata because they will cause a negative reaction from the republics.
It seems that everyone is waiting for the exact relations between republics to be clarified. Even national TV news programs are now carrying items about the country's extreme economic paralysis. This report from the Donbass region in the Ukraine shows public transport at a standstill due to fuel shortages. The reason given is that Russia stopped supplies until the inter-republican agreement is signed. And shop managers are refusing to restock their shelves until the imminent price rises are agreed between republics.
The Associated Press this afternoon quoted unnamed State Department officials as saying the U.S. will recognize the former Soviet republics as independent states by the end of the year. NATO ministers held security talks with their former Warsaw Pact adversaries in Brussels today. In a letter to the conference, Russian President Yeltsin said Russia would like to join NATO eventually. NATO ministers did not immediately endorse the idea. British Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd said, "We are not extending NATO eastward." But NATO Secretary General Manfred Werner said nothing is excluded, noting that Yeltsin referred to Russian membership as a long-term goal.
In South Lebanon, Israeli commandos seized 3 Arabs in a helicopter raid today. The Israeli army said the 3 were suspected terrorists, and the raid was part of an anti-terrorist campaign. Later, they said the 3 men would be released this weekend. Meanwhile, Lebanese police said 1 adult and 2 children were killed when a booby-trapped flashlight blew up. It was found in the car of one of the kidnapped Arabs. Police claimed the flashlight was planted by the Israeli commandos. UN Secretary General Peres de Cuellar said today that he expects Lebanese terrorists to release the body of an American hostage very soon. 2 Americans are known to have died in captivity. They're Marine Lieutenant Colonel William Higgins, who was assigned to a UN peacekeeping force, and William Buckley, the former CIA station chief in Beirut. Peres de Cuellar indicated that Higgins' body would likely be released first.
That's it for the news summary. Just ahead on the News Hour, the economy, efforts to get it moving again. Gergen and Shields, and heated talks at the start of an historic conference in South Africa.
First tonight, we look at the Federal Reserve's move to jumpstart the stalled economy. Today, the Fed slashed 1 full point from the discount rate, down to 3.5%. That's what it now costs banks to get loans from the Fed. In turn, many of the nation's largest banks cut the rate they charge their best corporate customers. Here to tell us what effect they expect the lower rates to have are Paul Samuelson, professor of economics at MIT and winner of the 1970 Nobel Prize. He joins us from Boston. And James Grant, editor of Grant's Interest Rate Observer, a biweekly financial newsletter. Professor Samuelson, what's your basic reaction to this move by the Fed?
At long last, it's been too little and too late for about 20 months now with the Federal Reserve, and I'm glad to see a full point drop, and I think it's only the first of a number of such.
A number of what? You expect more, even further cuts?
Yes. We need to have as many easings of the credit situation as are needed to offset the insolvency of the banks, the malaise of consumers' confidence, and now is the time for action, and I'm glad to see the White House has finally flip-flopped and recognized that there's more than just a little economic malaise out there.
Mr. Grant, what's your basic reaction?
Well, there's more than just one country out there, and I think it's notable that we cut our rates a day after the Germans raised theirs, the Germans being the country in surplus internationally, and ours being the country in deficit. By rights, by orthodox practice, it should be the other way around. So the Germans now have the highest rates in one case since 1931, and we have the lowest rates in almost 30 years. And I think that the dollar, which was mauled today in trading, will be under increasing pressure, and it's not at all clear to me that this economy will respond to these low rates. In fact, if the idea is to restore solvency of the banking system, the Federal Reserve simply can't do it. It can't create equity or net worth through lower rates. It can kind of invite people to get up and lend and borrow, but it can't really force them.
I'll come back to the moment, but do you regard this, Mr. Grant, as an act of measured judgment today, or an act close to panic because the Fed feared that we weren't just in a stalled situation, but headed for a new recession or a double-dip recession?
I think it's very much a case of panic. Successively, the chairman of the Fed has said approximately no recession, small recession, recovery, depression. It's anything but measured, and I think he is proving why central planning is in such disrepute worldwide. If the guy running the interest rates in a central bank had the answers, the Soviet Union would still be functioning. Economic planning would be viable. In fact, I think capitalism has been rather oversold in this respect. We have cycles, and in some cycles people are exuberant, indeed reckless, and we saw that for a number of years preceding the break. And now we are seeing the inevitable pullback, and we are seeing a period of very costly, very painful, but very necessary retrenchment.
So you agree with Professor Samuelson, this is the right thing to be doing?
Well, I think it's the inevitable thing to be doing. I don't think it's the right thing to be doing in the sense that we are billing this as a kind of a $5 cancer cure. It's simply not going to do what we would have it do. People are in debt to their eyes, and they will continue to pay down debt because arithmetic, society, and law all push them to do that. We are in a contraction of credit worldwide, not just in this country. I think it's a long way to go.
Do you agree with Mr. Grant, Professor Samuelson, that this is an act of something akin to an act of panic by the Fed, that it demonstrates how seriously they feared an even deeper recession?
Well, I think that the Fed realizes that it's going to get a lot of blame in the history books because it has been our main weapon and it has not been used fully. And as a result, we're going to get a great deal of fiscal policy, something that a conservative Alan Greenspan, the last thing in the world that he wanted, but he brought it on the country.
Fiscal policy is economist language for playing with the tax structure.
And expenditures.
And expenditures, yeah. And so, in other words, you don't think yourself, you would agree with Mr. Grant, the lowering of interest rates is not going to be enough to use the slang term, jumpstart this economy.
Well, it's a very important step, and it won't achieve its purpose overnight. But we have about 45 Harvard Business School kind of case studies in economic history where the monetary weapon has been used. And only in about 3 of those, during the Great Depression, was it a case of pushing on a string. Was it a case where monetary policy can't work? We just have to accept what the Lord sent, and if he sends us 12% unemployment, we must accept that. That's not what the evidence of experience suggests.
Mm-hmm. Well, will lower interest rates cause American consumers and businesses to borrow more to buy more? Before we continue our analysis here, business correspondent Paul Salmon looks at the way banks have been responding to the recession already.
One bank's TV ad on the credit crunch.
Some banks have tremendous assets, but those same banks are putting a freeze on business loans.
This bank, however, wants us to know it's trying to unfreeze the money. Unfreeze our whole economy by letting loose the flow of lending. The money banks are supposed to be circulating to businesses and consumers alike. It's the message of United Jersey and of the giant chemical bank here in New York City.
As far as the loans are concerned, the window is wide open over here, and it has been, never closed. So that's the message for your prospects.
Frank Lorenzo, the banker, not the airline guy, is rallying his loan officers at Chemical Bank's Midtown branch. They're anxious about the upcoming merger with manufacturers Hanover that will make this the nation's 4th largest bank, but trim jobs in the process. They're also anxious about meeting their loan quotas.
As we're going through the merger process, it's so important that you continue to take care of your customers and prospect.
Everyone knows that banks are on the ropes these days, but it's also true that to stay in business long term, a bank has to keep its name in the market, so it can keep lending out its deposits at interest to businesses that will pay it back.
My most important product is credit. My second most important product is credit. And my third most important product is credit.
In fact, if you're a bank, just about your only product is credit, the money you lend. So lending officers like Betsy Simons and Denise Gross here are getting ready to push new loans, armed with PR gimmicks. Business card holders, a penny in a bottle, and our personal favorite, the Nestle's Crunch Bar, to suggest that at Chemical, there is no credit crunch.
Do the crunch bars? Yes, I have 3 crunch bars. Is that enough, or should we bring one for everybody?
First stop, New York Elevator on Manhattan's West Side. Since this company started almost a decade ago, it's been banking exclusively with Chemical. Simons and Gross would like it to borrow some more money.
Bring money with you?
Actually, wait a minute.
Time to tempt the potential borrowers with a few pennies in the bottle. In for a penny, in for a pound.
Oh, my Lord. How did you put come on, tell me. How'd you do that? So you're here to loan us some more money?
Well, I think we'd certainly, like to hear how you all are doing and how the companies have been and how the recession is affecting the company.
Now, bankers are always pulled in 2 directions. They make money by making loans, but they must constantly monitor their borrowers to make sure the loans are safe. It's like credit card companies. They love to up your limit, yet badger you the minute you fall behind. But in a recession, it's the borrowers who get nervous, although they're tempted if interest rates fall far enough.
Do you see the interest rates staying the way they are for a while longer?
I think so. I wouldn't be surprised if they went a little lower. I mean, we have a presidential election in '92, and I think, something's got to spark this economy back to a growth economy.
Like for ourselves, it's much less costly right now to borrow some money from you, but at the same time, nobody wants to borrow because you don't know when it's going to spark again.
That's exactly right. What's happening is, despite the lower interest rates, typically, as a banker, you'd get all these companies coming in and saying, hey, it's not so expensive for me to borrow anymore.
If in 1982 or 83 or 84,
Absolutely.
you lowered your interest rate by 5 points, they come flooding in, you'd have to lock the door.
And that's not
But
happening.
today they don't want to borrow the money because they're afraid they won't be able to pay it back.
In fact, that's what these guys are afraid of. And this fear is one key to the credit crunch. Credit-worthy borrowers like New York Elevator are nervous, and so they're borrowing less, if at all. After the meeting was over, we asked if New York Elevator was likely to borrow.
I doubt it. I don't think they're going to. I think they're a very conservative company. They're controlling their costs. They'll borrow if they need it, but I don't know that they're not going to borrow just because the interest rate went down.
Most people think of a credit crunch meaning that the banks don't want to lend. Well, I do want to lend, but most of my borrowers do not want to borrow.
Including the elevator company.
Oh, yeah. I mean, these people, as I say, it's how do I survive the recession?
Now, obviously, frightened borrowers aren't the whole story of the credit crunch. Many banks are frightened, too. They've been making risky loans for years, losing money when the loans went bad. Then came the recession, more troubled loans, and the regulators got tough. Some would say too tough. As a result, these banks are now unwilling or unable to lend. Obviously to the bad borrowers of the past, especially in real estate, but also to more traditional businesses in hard-hit regions like New England. Take the case of Bugatti Leather. Its line of credit, that is the amount it can borrow, was pulled when its bank, the Bank of New England, began to fail. What was your line of credit?
It was $450,000 at one time, before it got shrunk down to $300,000, and then they said they wanted another $100,000 back.
The Bank of New England needed its money back, as we'll explain in a bit, so it finally called in the rest of Terry Scheller's loan.
The remaining loan, right. And I was meeting the interest payments, and I didn't think that there was a problem. I thought since my net worth had improved a little bit, or the company's net worth had improved a little bit, that they were going to be increasing my line of credit.
And instead they were lowering it?
Instead, they took it away entirely.
Now, Harvard Business School graduate Terry Scheller has been in the leather business for 20 years, coming up with new products like the spare pocket here, even advertising them on late-night TV.
Take your spare pocket with you. Priced now at only $7.95 in soft naked leather.
This is a small, solid company that provides jobs in a working-class section of Boston and had never missed an interest payment.
Hadn't missed any?
No, no.
Not even one little one?
No, no interest payments were missed, no.
But when his bank got into trouble, it spelled trouble for Scheller as well. Bank of New England was forced to call in its good loans.
Now, we're going to simplify here, but basically by law, a bank has to maintain what's called a capital ratio to make it a safe place to put your money. Bank's capital is simply its own money, represented here by these spare pockets, and it comes from investors and profits over the years. The bank's capital is supposed to be, and we're going to keep the numbers simple here, so say 5% of the total value of its loans. Okay, one glum day, a real estate loan goes bad. Developer never even put up a building, a total loss. Well, the bank has reserves for losses, but this wipes them out and then some. The extra loss gets subtracted from the bank's own capital. And if this keeps happening, the capital keeps shrinking, more losses, less capital, until the capital represents far less than 5% of the total loans. And then along comes the regulator, who says that to restore the ratio, the bank has to get more capital or has to shrink its loan portfolio. But more capital has to come from investors who don't want to invest any more money, or from profits of which there aren't any. And so the bank starts calling in its loans. And ironically, in a bad economy, the only companies that can pay back their loans tend to be good borrowers like Bugatti Leather. Bugatti can't get its loan from another local bank since they're all pretty much in the same boat. And this business is too small to interest a big bank from another region or from abroad. Richard Siren, head of the Boston Federal Reserve Bank, recently gave a similar explanation to Congress, which led him to rename the credit crunch.
So I think these are all the factors that come together to bring about this thing that we're calling a credit crunch, which is really a capital crunch.
But whether they call it a credit or capital crunch, the upshot's the same. The worst-hit banks shrink. And even those that don't have to are often, unlike chemical, scared to make new business loans. Some of them are actually retreating from the role of lender and putting their deposits into safer investments. Banking consultant Keith Stock.
It is more profitable today for banks to park money in less risky asset categories, such as Ginnie Mae's and Treasury securities, than it is to invest in small commercial or other commercial types of loans today.
That is, instead of extending credit to the likes of Terry Scheller, some banks are putting their money into low-risk investments like government bonds, which don't get counted as loans in their capital ratio. As a result, businesses like Scheller's can't borrow. Now, say one of his Japanese customers wanted a multi-million-dollar order. Scheller would need money up front for the materials, but today...
I'd have to say, I'm sorry, we can't afford to buy the materials to make your order for you. I can't afford to finance this order.
Without borrowing the money?
Without borrowing the money.
And you can't borrow the money?
And I can't borrow the money, so...
So it actually contracts your business?
Yes, I can't even go after those loans right now, or that business.
You'd think that from a bank's point of view, a small business like Scheller's would be an ideal borrower. Big businesses, after all, can raise money in the bond and stock markets. So it's no wonder Chemical Bank is looking for small business borrowers. Next stop, a video production company on 32nd Street, just off Fifth Avenue.
What's the best thing that can happen here?
That they say they're going to be sending us their financial statements in the next week or two.
And then that they borrow money?
Right.
Who's their bank?
Citibank.
So this is a competition?
That's right.
I see. You're trying to take the business away?
That's right.
I see. So is this a higher stakes kind of thing than the last place we were?
Yes. This is a situation that, you know, we have to prove that we are in the market, that we know their business better, and that we're competitive.
Beetlejuice is a video production company. The business is capital intensive. It costs about $1 million to set up a room like this. And even though there are way too many video houses in New York right now, they have to spend the money to stay on the cutting edge of technology and keep their clients.
And we have to do more for these people. We have to sit down and give them more services for less money and be more attentive to their needs. And it just gets incredibly difficult to do. You know, we'll keep trying.
Though our loan officers have met General Manager Jerry Price on the right, they're talking to co-owner Sam Domenico for the first time.
Unless about 15% of the facilities in New York City go down, I don't know what other thing might happen other than that making a big difference.
Now, this is pretty grim talk from a businessman in his first meeting with prospective bankers. But Simons & Gross aren't fazed.
So we're looking forward to looking at your financial statements and seeing if we can...
They should be available probably within a week, so you'll get to take a look at them.
Terrific.
The borrower is depressed, but the bankers are gung-ho. How come?
The fact that this person is telling us right up front that his industry is trouble, I think, is a real big plus, because as I said before, no surprises, tell me all your problems, we'll work them out together. I'd rather deal with a person like that than somebody who tells me things are terrific when I know they're not terrific. So somebody who tells you that, he's reacting very quickly to what he perceives as problems, and he probably will survive.
Back on the street, Simons & Gross are pleased.
I think it was successful. Yeah, I think it looks like an impressive company that we'd like to continue to call on.
And they're going to give you the financials.
Yep, they're going to give us the financials, and hopefully we'll be able to do business with them.
And they're not stuck with Citibank.
And I'm not stuck with Citibank.
Now notice that even if Chemical does make the video loan, it won't be putting much new money into the economy. This is more of a refinancing, consolidating old loans at a lower interest rate.
So now think about all of this in terms of the credit or capital crunch. Even a bank out here blitzing for business can't do much to help stimulate the economy. And neither, it seems, can the government. Even though the Federal Reserve has been trying the traditional tactic of putting new money into the banking system and thereby driving down interest rates, the people banks want to lend to don't seem to want to borrow. And to the people who do want to borrow, banks won't or simply cannot lend. Finally, for as long as this double whammy prevails, it will be awfully tough to get the economy up and running.
For the record, Chemical was one of the banks that cut its prime rate today. Now for another perspective on the credit crunch problem, we turn to Nicholas Perna, chief economist at Shawmut National Corporation. Shawmut has banks in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. He joins us from Stamford, Connecticut. Mr. Samuelson and Mr. Grant are also back with us. Mr. Perna, how many banks are trying aggressively to lend like Chemical or blitzing for business, as Paul Salmon put it?
Oh, I think more and more banks, a large proportion of the banking population is shifting its attention to trying to gather more business.
And so it's out there really pushing loans on reluctant, mostly business customers, or are they trying to find consumer borrowers too?
Let me tell you where there has been a big increase in borrowing. There's been an enormous rise in residential mortgage borrowing thus far in 1991. Now, granted, a large part of that was for refinancings, but a major portion of it was also for purchases of homes. We've seen in New England a sizable increase in the number of homes that have been sold, something that's a sharp contrast with what happened over the past 5 years where home sales are declining. So the things that were supposed to kick in first in terms of borrowing have indeed kicked in. And I think part of the problem is that commercial and industrial loans are really a lagging indicator of the economy. They don't start coming back until after the economy comes back. And I think the problem is primarily one that the economy hasn't had sufficient momentum to either stimulate loan demand or to rejuvenate capital at banks.
Do you think the lower interest rates dramatically announced today with a 1-point drop in the discount rate are going to bring customers back in?
Well, I think they're part of the process. For one thing, think of it this way. With lower rates today, it qualifies that many more people or that many more businesses to borrow who weren't qualified yesterday. Many
You mean apart from their own emotional attitude to it or reluctance, it's a simple matter of whether they can afford to make the payments?
Well, they can now afford it more readily today than they could yesterday, and clearly more readily today than they could a year ago. I think that's an important part of the process. But I think what hasn't happened is that we're looking at this in a very micro sense. We're looking at it from the point of view of individual business people. And yet what hasn't happened is the typical shift in sentiment that takes place when you come out of a recession and go into a recovery, where businesses start looking to rebuild inventories, where businesses have a reasonably optimistic view of the future. So I think a lot of what you see as moroseness is a reflection of really just a very tepid economic recovery, and if it's the result of the Fed not having cut interest rates enough before or insufficient fiscal stimulation, then I think Professor Samuelson's prescriptions will work, and I tend to agree with him.
Well, or will the lower cost of money encourage more banks to make money the way Paul Solomon said they're doing by putting money into treasury bonds and avoiding the risks of lending and using the spread between the cost of money to them and what the treasury bonds will pay?
I think that banks would much prefer to do lending. I think the yields on lending in a reasonable enough environment are superior to the yields on buying treasuries. Treasuries yield 7.5% today. And I think that part of the process, there's a very big dynamic process that takes place. For example, when interest rates fall...
Well, I mean, are the banks you represent doing that, putting money into treasuries because they're risk-free and you get 3% or something and a profit with no risk?
Well, I think that's part of the process. I think over the past year or so, or past 2 years, some of that has gone on. But I think we are now more aggressively looking to do loans. I think that's been a phenomenon of particularly the last 6 months. We'd prefer to do lending than to buy treasuries, quite honestly.
Professor Samuelson, what do you think is going to undo this knot of some banks too scared to lend or customers too scared to borrow? I mean, is lower rates going to do that?
Well, lower rates will help. If we let our interest rate in America be set in Frankfurt, Germany by the Bundesbank in order to keep the dollar high and let it be set in Tokyo, all of the problems that we have seen in the banking community and on Main Street will intensify, and you'll have a vicious circle downward. We've been through this again and again. As Mr. Grant said, that's part of the capitalistic business cycle. Now, when I was a boy, business cycles were really business cycles. We've tamed them only a little, and we're not talking about central planning. We're talking about sensible leaning against the wind. And I don't think it's one thing. We did not achieve victory today with the 1% drop in the discount rate. You don't jumpstart an economy. It's a bad image that it's all there, ready to take on of its own accord, if only we give it the needed spark. What it needs is the fuel continuously, today, tomorrow, for the rest of the decade of spending. And fortunately, we have a little elbow room. Paul Volcker was able to get the 1983 substantial recovery going because he didn't have to worry about meeting the gold standard. He did not have pegged exchange rates as people in Europe today still do have. If the dollar drops 6% vis-a-vis the yen, I think that'll be a great thing. It'll make us more competitive. It'll mean much more than President Bush going to Tokyo with business leaders and jawboning industrialists there to take the products which they don't particularly want and which aren't competitive. But with a 6% edge, a lot of products that weren't competitive will become competitive.
Let me ask Mr. Grant, what do you think is going to undo this knot of, that we saw that is sort of tying up the banking industry at the moment?
Well, one thing none of us has mentioned so far is that a drop in interest rates represents cheaper cost of borrowing, but it also represents lower interest income. And by dropping interest rates to the lowest levels in 20 or 25 years, we are substantially removing that interest income from people that is so important to people over 45 years old. I have no great faith that this move is going to do what it is intended to do. I think that in contrast to Professor Samuelson's observation of our monetary policy being made in Frankfurt, in point of fact, the world is one marketplace. We sell goods or try to sell them in Asia. We trade money in Asia and in Europe. And I think it's no accident that our rates were cut today on a Friday when Europe is sleeping and when it's preparing for a long Christmas week holiday. This will mortify the Europeans. And we can't say that it would be too bad if the Germans were running our policy, because in fact we're all running each other's. That is the nature of this wonderful new world of floating exchange rates and of traders trading around hundreds of billions of dollars a day in money over the electronic wires.
Okay, I have very short time left. I'd just like to know from each of you, starting with you, Mr. Perna, is it going to need, in addition to the lower interest rates, is it going to need something like the kind of tax cut stimulus or spending stimulus that is being talked about in Washington?
Yeah, yes, it is, and I think, but it would have to be something that did not damage financial markets. In other words, something that may be temporary, something that would be clean, but not something that would put fear into the bond market.
Let me move on. Sorry to cut you off. Professor Samuelson, in a few words, do you think it's going to need something like that Washington action that's being talked about?
Now that we've gotten behind the wave, I think we're going to need some budget fiscal stimulus. And that wasn't my preferred solution, but we have to face the facts as they are.
Mr. Grant?
Passage of time. I'm afraid that's what's going to be needed for people to rebuild their financial affairs, for banks to rebuild their net worth.
You mean a tax cut stimulus package is unnecessary or wrong?
Ineffective. And I think that we have gotten ourselves into a terrific scrape by financial practices that are unprecedented in this country, certainly, in modern financial history. And what is needed is time to